Case 1. Paul Canero. Money has ended friendships, divided families, and sparked wars throughout history. But few financial disputes have led to consequences as devastating as what happened one November morning in Colts Neck, New Jersey. Paul Canero seemed, by all accounts, to be living an ordinary life in Ocean Township with his wife Susan and their 2 daughters. He worked alongside his younger brother Keith, running computer service companies out of Asbury Park. The brothers had built their businesses together, sharing both profits and responsibilities. From the outside, the Canero family looked like the embodiment of the American dream. 2 brothers working side by side, raising their families just 11 miles apart in comfortable New Jersey suburbs. But beneath that surface, something darker had taken root. Keith, the younger brother, had recently discovered discrepancies in their business accounts. Money was missing, and Keith believed Paul was responsible. On the evening of November 19th, 2018, Keith sent a critical email to their business associates. He wrote that he would be discontinuing payments to Paul's wife until the missing funds were recovered. That message would be one of the last communications Keith ever sent. The following morning, November 20th, firefighters responded to 2 separate blazes. The first call came from Paul Canero's home in Ocean Township. Flames had erupted in the early hours, but Paul, his wife, and their daughters all escaped uninjured. Paul stood outside with his family, appearing shocked and cooperative as emergency responders worked to contain the fire. Later that same day, a far more horrific scene unfolded in Colts Neck. Smoke billowed from Keith Canero's mansion, a sprawling property in one of New Jersey's most affluent neighborhoods. When firefighters arrived, they discovered Keith's body outside the home. He had been shot multiple times. Inside the burning structure, the nightmare deepened. Firefighters found the remains of Keith's wife, Jennifer, and their 2 young children, 11-year-old Jesse and 8-year-old Sophia. The fire had been deliberately set, and the brutality of what had occurred became evident as investigators began piecing together the scene. Jennifer had been both shot and stabbed. The children had been stabbed. The mansion was engulfed in flames, meant to destroy any evidence of the violence that had taken place. Prosecutors moved quickly. Within days, they connected the fires and the evidence found at both scenes. Paul Canero was arrested and charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder, along with arson, weapons violations, and conspiracy charges. Investigators believed Paul had set fire to his own home to create a false narrative, to make it appear as though both families were being targeted by an outside threat. The reality, authorities alleged, was far simpler and far more chilling. Paul had confronted his brother over the money dispute, and when that confrontation turned violent, he tried to erase the evidence by burning Keith's home. The fire at Paul's own house was meant to provide cover, to suggest that someone else was responsible. The case against Paul rested on several key pieces of evidence. Forensic teams found biological material linking him to the crime scene. Clothing discovered in his basement bore bloodstains, later identified through advanced DNA testing. Cell phone records and financial documents painted a picture of mounting tension between the brothers in the weeks leading up to the incident. Prosecutors argued that Paul's motive was financial. He had been taking money from their joint ventures, and when Keith threatened to cut him off, Paul decided to eliminate the threat permanently. Paul Canero's defense team has maintained his innocence from the beginning. His attorneys have argued that the evidence against him is circumstantial and that Paul had no reason to harm his brother or his family. They've pointed out that Paul loved his niece and nephew deeply and that the idea of him committing such violence defies logic. Yet the prosecution has countered that desperation and greed often drive people to unthinkable acts. As of late 2024, Paul Canero remains in custody at the Monmouth County Correctional Institute, awaiting trial. His case has faced numerous delays due to complex legal challenges, including disputes over the admissibility of DNA evidence obtained through newer forensic methods. Jury selection is now scheduled to begin in early 2025. If convicted, Paul faces life in prison without the possibility of parole on each murder charge. The Canero case has left the Colts Neck community shaken. Keith's family is gone, their lives extinguished in an act of unimaginable violence. Paul's own daughters have lost their uncle, aunt, and cousins, and potentially their father as well. The story serves as a stark reminder that the bonds of family, no matter how strong they may appear, can fracture under the weight of betrayal and financial desperation. The trial ahead will determine whether Paul Canero is responsible for one of New Jersey's most horrific family tragedies, or whether, as his attorneys insist, he's been wrongly accused of destroying everything he once held dear. But family wasn't the only relationship destroyed by greed in New Jersey. Sometimes, marriage itself becomes the scene of the crime. Case 2, Melanie McGuire, when 3 suitcases washed ashore near Virginia's Chesapeake Bay in May 2004. Fishermen and beachcombers had no idea they were about to uncover one of the most shocking crimes in New Jersey history. Melanie McGuire appeared to have it all. A registered nurse working at a fertility clinic in Morristown, she was intelligent, ambitious, and well-regarded by her colleagues. She had married William Bill McGuire in 1999, and together they had built a life in Woodbridge Township with their 2 young sons. Bill worked as a computer programmer, and the couple seemed to be climbing the ladder of success. In April 2004, they closed on their first home, a significant milestone that should have marked the beginning of a new chapter. But Melanie had a secret. For 2 years, she had been involved in a relationship with her boss, Dr. Bradley Miller. The connection had begun when Melanie was pregnant with her second child, and though they had discussed a future together, Dr. Miller made it clear he would not be leaving his wife. Melanie found herself caught between 2 lives, one with her husband and children, the other with a man who could never fully commit to her. That tension would soon erupt into violence. On April 28, 2004, Bill and Melanie returned from closing on their new house. Bill made several phone calls that evening, excitedly telling friends about the purchase. Those would be the last calls anyone would receive from him. Within hours, prosecutors believe, Melanie drugged her husband using chloral hydrate, a powerful sedative she had access to through her medical work. Once Bill was incapacitated, she shot him twice in the chest and once in the head with a .38 caliber handgun. Then came the truly horrifying part. She dismembered his body in their apartment. The first suitcase appeared on May 5th near the Chesapeake Bay Bridge Tunnel's 4th artificial island. Fishermen discovered human legs wrapped in garbage bags. 6 days later, a second, larger suitcase was found on Fisherman Island, containing a torso and a head. The head bore a single wound, and the torso had 2. On May 16th, the third and smallest suitcase surfaced, containing arms. Authorities released a facial reconstruction, and an acquaintance of Bill McGuire's recognized him. Melanie immediately became the prime suspect. Investigators began unraveling her carefully constructed story. They discovered that just 2 days before Bill's disappearance, Melanie had driven to Easton, Pennsylvania, and purchased a .38 caliber handgun, the same caliber that was used in the killing. The receipt also showed an unspecified $9.95 purchase, which matched the price of wad cutter cartridges, the exact type of ammunition found in Bill's body. Melanie claimed she had bought the weapon for Bill because his felony conviction from traffic violations prevented him from purchasing one himself. But prosecutors argued this was simply a convenient excuse. Further evidence mounted. Computer forensics revealed that someone had searched for information about undetectable poisons and how to commit the perfect crime on Melanie's laptop. Trash bags found in her apartment matched those used to wrap Bill's remains. A blanket discovered in one of the suitcases bore the logo of a medical supply company that serviced the clinic where Melanie worked. Cell phone records placed her traveling through Delaware around the time the first suitcase appeared in Virginia, a route that would take someone directly to the Chesapeake Bay. Melanie's defense team argued that the evidence was purely circumstantial. They claimed that anyone with access to her computer could have conducted those searches, and that the trash bags and blanket were common items that proved nothing. They suggested that Bill might have been involved with dangerous people, perhaps through gambling debts or other financial troubles. But the prosecution presented a different narrative, one of a woman trapped in a loveless marriage, involved with a man who would never leave his wife, who decided the only way forward was to eliminate her husband. In April 2007, after a lengthy trial, a jury found Melanie McGuire guilty on all counts: first-degree murder, desecrating human remains, and perjury. 2 months later, Judge Richard Cooper sentenced her to life in prison. Under New Jersey's No Early Release Act, she must serve at least 63 years and 9 months before becoming eligible for parole. That means Melanie will not be considered for release until she is over 90 years old. Today, Melanie McGuire is incarcerated at the Edna Mahan Correctional Facility for women in Clinton, New Jersey. She has maintained her innocence throughout her imprisonment, arguing that critical evidence was mishandled and that her trial was unfair. A podcast titled Direct Appeal has re-examined her case, raising questions about whether justice was truly served. Her attorneys have filed multiple appeals, all of which have been denied. The case has been featured in books, documentaries, and television programs, cementing her place in true crime history as the suitcase killer. For the McGuire family, the tragedy remains profound. Bill's mother, Evelyn, lost her son in the most brutal way imaginable. The couple's 2 sons grew up without their father and with their mother behind bars. The case stands as a grim reminder of how secrets, betrayal, and desperation can transform an ordinary life into a nightmare that reverberates across generations. But while Melanie's crime shocked New Jersey, another case would soon prove that greed could destroy even the closest childhood friendships. Case 3, Liam McAtasney. Friendship is supposed to be sacred, built on trust and shared memories. But for 19-year-old Sarah Stern, her childhood friendship would become the very thing that ended her life. Liam McAtasney and Sarah Stern had known each other since elementary school in Neptune, New Jersey. They grew up together, attended the same schools, and remained close even after graduation. Sarah had always been described as kind-hearted and artistic, someone who saw the good in people and cherished her friendships. She had attended prom with Liam's best friend and roommate, Preston Taylor. The 3 of them seemed inseparable, young people navigating life in their small coastal town, figuring out their futures together. But Liam harbored a dark secret. He envied Sarah's financial situation. Her mother had passed away from cancer in 2013, leaving Sarah a modest inheritance. Liam believed Sarah had tens of thousands of dollars hidden in her home, and he became fixated on the idea of taking it. For months, he discussed his plan with Preston, joking at first, then growing more serious. He told Preston he wanted to rob Sarah, to steal the money he was convinced she was hoarding. Preston later testified that Liam's comments became increasingly detailed, describing exactly how he would strangle Sarah and make it look like an accident. On December 2nd, 2016, Liam put his plan into motion. He contacted Sarah under the pretense of spending time together. She trusted him completely. He was her friend, someone she had known for years. That trust would prove fatal. Liam arrived at Sarah's home and lured her inside. Once they were alone, he attacked her. The strangulation was brutal and prolonged, taking nearly 30 minutes. Sarah fought desperately for her life, but Liam was relentless. When she finally stopped moving, he broke into her safe and found only $10,000, far less than he had anticipated. Liam then called Preston for help. Together, they wrapped Sarah's body and placed it in her mother's van. They drove to the Route 35 bridge in Belmar, a location they had scouted beforehand. In the early hours of December 3rd, they threw Sarah's body off the bridge into the Shark River below. They left her car parked near the bridge, staging the scene to look like a suicide. Sarah's father, Michael Stern, reported her missing later that day. Massive search efforts were launched, with friends, family, and community members scouring the area. Liam and Preston even participated in the search, acting concerned and helpful while knowing exactly where Sarah was. But Liam made a critical mistake. He couldn't resist bragging. About a month after Sarah's disappearance, he met with his friend Anthony Curry, an amateur filmmaker. Liam began describing the events in graphic detail, explaining how he had choked Sarah, how long it had taken, and how disappointed he was to find so little money. Unbeknownst to Liam, Anthony had grown suspicious after Sarah vanished and had contacted police. Law enforcement convinced Anthony to secretly record his conversation with Liam, and the resulting video became the centerpiece of the prosecution's case. In the recording, Liam's voice is chilling as he recounts the events. He describes Sarah's final moments with disturbing casualness, treating her life as nothing more than an obstacle to the money he wanted. The video was played in court during his trial, and jurors watched in stunned silence as Liam admitted to everything: the planning, the strangulation, the disposal of Sarah's body. His defense team tried to argue that Liam had fabricated the story to impress Anthony, who was working on a horror film, but the details were too specific and too accurate to dismiss as fiction. Preston Taylor had already cut a deal with prosecutors, pleading guilty to robbery, conspiracy, and desecrating human remains in exchange for his testimony against Liam. During the trial, Preston described how Liam had manipulated him into helping, how they had spent months planning the crime, and how Liam had shown no remorse afterward. The jury deliberated for just a few hours before returning guilty verdicts on all 7 counts, including first-degree murder. On June 21, 2019, Judge Richard English sentenced Liam McAtasney to life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 10 years for desecrating Sarah's remains. The judge noted the heinous nature of the crime, emphasizing that Liam had planned Sarah's death for 6 months and had convinced someone else to participate. Judge English also praised Anthony Curry for his courage in coming forward, stating that without Anthony's cooperation, the case might have gone cold. Sarah's body has never been recovered. The Shark River was searched extensively, but no trace of her remains was found. Her father, Michael Stern, has said that while the conviction brings some measure of justice, the pain of losing Sarah in such a horrific way will never fade. He wore purple to the sentencing, Sarah's favorite color, and read a powerful impact statement about the void her absence has left in his life. Liam McAtasney is currently serving his sentence at a New Jersey state prison. He has filed appeals challenging his conviction, but all have been denied. His case has been featured in numerous true crime programs and documentaries, serving as a cautionary tale about greed, betrayal, and the destruction of trust. Preston Taylor is also serving his 18-year sentence, eligible for parole after serving 85% of his term. The story of Sarah Stern's death is a heartbreaking reminder that sometimes the greatest danger comes not from strangers, but from those we believe we know best. And while Liam's greed destroyed Sarah's life, another New Jersey case would prove that financial crimes could ruin reputations just as thoroughly. Case 4. Teresa Giudice. Reality television thrives on drama, but for one New Jersey housewife, the drama spilled far beyond the screen and straight into a federal courtroom. Teresa Giudice became a household name through her role on Bravo's The Real Housewives of New Jersey, which premiered in 2009. With her big personality, signature table-flipping moment, and extravagant lifestyle, Teresa embodied the excess and entertainment that made the show a hit. She lived with her husband, Giuseppe Joe Giudice, and their 4 daughters in a sprawling mansion in Towako, New Jersey. The family drove luxury cars, wore designer clothes, and seemed to live without financial limits. Teresa even published multiple best-selling cookbooks, further cementing her celebrity status. But behind the cameras and carefully curated social media posts, the Giudice family was drowning in debt and deception. For years, Teresa and Joe had been falsifying financial documents to secure loans and credit they could never repay. The scheme began long before their reality television fame. Between 2001 and 2008, the couple submitted fraudulent mortgage applications to multiple lenders. They lied about their employment, inflated their incomes, and forged documents to make themselves appear far wealthier than they actually were. Teresa claimed on one application that she earned $15,000 per month as a realtor, a job she never actually held. When the couple filed for bankruptcy in October 2009, they were required by law to disclose all their assets, income, and financial dealings. Instead, they concealed businesses they owned, rental income they received, and the money Teresa was earning from the Real Housewives of New Jersey. They also failed to report income from Teresa's website sales, personal appearances, and magazine features. The couple even lied about their anticipated earnings from the show's upcoming second season. When questioned under oath in bankruptcy court, both Teresa and Joe provided false testimony, further compounding their legal troubles. Federal investigators began scrutinizing their finances, and in July 2013, a grand jury returned a 39-count indictment against both Teresa and Joe. The charges included conspiracy to commit mail and wire fraud, bank fraud, bankruptcy fraud, and making false statements on loan applications. Additionally, Joe was charged with failing to file tax returns between 2004 and 2008, during which time he earned nearly $1 million. The indictment detailed a pattern of calculated dishonesty designed to enrich the couple at the expense of banks, creditors, and the government. Initially, both Teresa and Joe pleaded not guilty. But as the evidence mounted and the reality of their situation became clear, they changed their strategy. In March 2014, both entered guilty pleas before Judge Esther Salas in Newark Federal Court. They admitted to conspiracy, bankruptcy fraud, and lying under oath. The courtroom was packed with media and curious onlookers, eager to see how the reality star would handle the very real consequences of her actions. At sentencing in October 2014, Teresa broke down in tears. She told the judge she was scared and that she needed to learn how to take care of herself and her family. Judge Salas acknowledged Teresa's remorse, but emphasized that fame and fortune do not exempt anyone from the law. The judge sentenced Teresa to 15 months in federal prison, followed by 2 years of supervised release. Joe received a much harsher sentence, 41 months in prison, due to his additional tax evasion charges and his role as the primary architect of the fraud. The couple was also ordered to pay $414,588 in restitution. To allow one parent to remain with their daughters at all times, the sentences were staggered. Teresa reported to the Federal Correctional Institution in Danbury, Connecticut, on January 5, 2015. She was assigned inmate number 657-03050. The facility, though federal, was far from glamorous. Teresa spent her days working in the kitchen, exercising, and adjusting to life behind bars. She later described the experience as humbling and life-changing. She was released on December 23, 2015, after serving 11 months of her sentence. She completed the remainder of her term under home confinement. Joe Giudice began his sentence in March 2016 at Fort Dix Federal Correctional Institution in New Jersey. His time in prison, however, would lead to an even more complicated outcome. Joe, who was born in Italy and brought to the United States as an infant, had never obtained American citizenship. As a result, immigration authorities issued a deportation order while he was still incarcerated. After completing his prison term in March 2019, Joe was transferred to an immigration detention facility. Later that year, he was deported to Italy, where he has remained ever since. The deportation effectively ended Teresa and Joe's marriage. The couple, who had been together for 20 years, finalized their separation in 2020. Teresa resumed her role on The Real Housewives of New Jersey and eventually remarried. Her daughters have traveled to Italy to visit their father, but the family unit that once seemed so unshakable has been permanently fractured. Teresa Giudice's story became a cultural phenomenon, illustrating the consequences of living beyond one's means and engaging in financial fraud. Her case was featured in countless news articles, television specials, and podcasts. The New Jersey Department of Education revoked her teaching credentials, and her reputation was forever altered. Yet Teresa has managed to rebuild her public image, continuing her television career and even competing on reality competition shows. The Giudice case serves as a stark reminder that the allure of wealth and fame can lead people to make catastrophic decisions. What began as falsified loan applications eventually spiraled into federal charges, imprisonment, and deportation. And while Teresa emerged from prison and rebuilt her life, the consequences of her actions continue to reverberate through her family. Her story is one of excess, deception, and the high price of trying to maintain an illusion of perfection. Yet not all crimes in New Jersey were motivated by greed. Some were driven by something far darker. Case 5, Khalil Wheeler Weaver. The rise of social media and dating apps promised connection and community. But for 3 young women in Essex County, those platforms became pathways to terror. Khalil Wheeler Weaver grew up in the well-to-do neighborhood of Seven Oaks in Orange, New Jersey. His family had deep ties to law enforcement. His stepfather worked as a detective in East Orange, and his uncle had retired from the Newark Police Department. Khalil himself was employed as a security guard and harbored dreams of becoming a police officer. To his high school classmates, he seemed unremarkable, nerdy, quiet, and somewhat socially awkward. He wore tucked-in shirts, khaki pants, and plain white shoes, giving the appearance of someone from a stable, respectable home. But behind that mundane exterior lurked a predator. In the late summer and fall of 2016, Khalil began using the social networking site Tagged to connect with women. He created multiple fake profiles under usernames like Lil Yacht Rock and Pimp Killer Ghost, using these personas to arrange meetings. His targets were carefully chosen. Women he believed society would overlook, individuals he assumed no one would miss. Prosecutors later argued that Khalil believed he could operate with impunity because his victims were marginalized. Robin West, a 19-year-old woman from Philadelphia, living in Union Township, was his first known victim. On September 1st, 2016, Khalil met her through Tagged and arranged to meet in person. What happened next remains partially unclear, but investigators believe Khalil strangled Robin and then set her body on fire inside a vacant home in Orange. He torched the building to destroy evidence, leaving nothing but charred remains. On October 22nd, 2016, 33-year-old Joanne Brown of Newark became Khalil's second victim. She, too, had connected with him through Tagged. Her body was discovered on December 5th in another vacant home in Orange, weeks after she went missing. The pattern was becoming clear. Khalil was luring women to secluded locations, ending their lives, and discarding their bodies in abandoned properties where they might not be found for weeks or months. On November 22, 2016, Khalil targeted 20-year-old Sarah Butler, a college student at Jersey City University who lived in Montclair. Sarah was bright, ambitious, and beloved by her family and friends. She had been communicating with someone on Tagged in the days leading up to her disappearance. Surveillance footage from a convenience store showed Khalil getting out of Sarah's mother's van and entering the store while Sarah remained in the vehicle. Hours later, Sarah was gone. Her body was discovered on December 1st at Eagle Rock Reservation in West Orange. She had been strangled, but Khalil made one critical mistake. He failed to kill one of his intended victims. Tiffany Taylor, a 34-year-old woman, met Khalil through Tagged and agreed to meet him at a motel in Elizabeth. After spending time together, they left in his car. What happened next was horrifying. Khalil handcuffed Tiffany, covered her mouth with duct tape, and began strangling her while committing a violent act. Tiffany repeatedly lost consciousness, but managed to convince Khalil to take her back to the motel, claiming she had left her phone there. When they arrived, she locked him out of the room and called 911. Shockingly, the responding officers did not believe her. They accused Tiffany of engaging in activities they disapproved of, threatened to arrest her, and refused to remove the handcuffs still dangling from her wrist. Tiffany's report was dismissed, and Khalil walked away. It was a devastating failure of the justice system, one that allowed Khalil to continue targeting women for weeks afterward. Sarah Butler's friends and family, determined to find her, took matters into their own hands. They accessed Sarah's social media accounts and discovered her communications with Khalil. They created a fake profile and lured him to a meeting in Montclair, then alerted police. When officers arrived, they arrested Khalil on December 6, 2016. The investigation that followed revealed the full extent of his crimes. Khalil's cell phone contained damning evidence. Geolocation data placed him at the scenes where the victims were last seen and where their bodies were discovered. Although he had worn gloves and condoms during his encounters, a small amount of his DNA was found beneath the fingernails of one victim. Prosecutors presented a mountain of circumstantial evidence, and in December 2019, a jury found Khalil Wheeler-Weaver guilty on all counts. He was convicted of 3 murders: attempted murder, kidnapping, aggravated assault, desecration of human remains, and aggravated arson. On October 6, 2021, Judge Mark Ali sentenced Khalil to 160 years in prison with parole eligibility after 145 years. During the sentencing hearing, Tiffany Taylor, the woman who survived, gave a powerful statement about how the attack had changed her life forever. The families of Robin West, Joanne Brown, and Sarah Butler also spoke, describing the immeasurable pain of losing their loved ones to such senseless violence. The story did not end there. In March 2022, while already serving his sentence, Khalil was charged with an additional murder, that of 15-year-old Mawa Doumbia, whose remains were discovered in an abandoned Orange home in 2019. Prosecutors allege Khalil met Mawa through similar online methods in October 2016 and ended her life in the same brutal fashion. That case remains ongoing. Khalil Wheeler-Weaver is currently incarcerated in a New Jersey state prison. His appeals have been denied, with judges affirming that the evidence against him was overwhelming and that his sentence was justified given the horrific nature of his crimes. His case has been featured in documentaries and news specials, highlighting both the dangers of online predators and the systemic failures that allowed him to continue operating for months. The women Khalil targeted were daughters, mothers, friends, and students. They deserved safety, respect, and justice. Instead, they encountered a man who viewed them as disposable. The case stands as a chilling reminder of how technology can be weaponized by those with malicious intent, and how vigilance, both from law enforcement and communities, is essential in preventing such tragedies. Yet while Khalil's crimes were committed by a stranger, another New Jersey case would reveal that sometimes the greatest threats come from within our own families. Case 6. Kathleen Dorset. Divorce is rarely easy, but for most people, it ends with paperwork and shared custody agreements. For Stephen Moore, it ended with his life. Kathleen Dorset was a kindergarten and third-grade teacher at the Gables School in Neptune Township, New Jersey. She was educated, well-regarded in her community, and seemed to embody the stability and care expected of an elementary school educator. In June 2007, she married Stephen Moore, a salesman at a local Honda dealership and a former competitive speed skater. The following year, Kathleen gave birth to their daughter, Elizabeth. For a time, they appeared to be building a happy life together. But cracks in the marriage soon appeared. Kathleen and Stephen disagreed fundamentally about how to raise their daughter, and those disagreements escalated into bitter arguments. Eventually, the couple decided to divorce, and a custody battle ensued. Both parents wanted primary custody of Elizabeth, and neither was willing to compromise. The legal process dragged on, creating tension not just between Kathleen and Stephen, but also involving Kathleen's parents, Thomas and Leslie Dorset. Thomas and Leslie had been deeply involved in their daughter's life, offering financial and emotional support throughout the divorce proceedings. They were also members of the Ocean Township Board of Education, giving them a respected position in the community. But beneath their respectable exterior, they harbored a dangerous resentment towards Stephen. When Kathleen, her parents, and Elizabeth planned to move to Florida for a fresh start, they realized Stephen would have to come along to maintain his parental rights. That meant Thomas and Leslie would be obligated to provide financial assistance to Stephen for the first 6 months after the move, a prospect they found intolerable. On August 16th, 2010, Stephen Moore arrived at the Dorset family home in Oakhurst, New Jersey, to drop off his daughter for a scheduled visit. It would be the last time he was seen alive. As Stephen approached the house, Thomas Dorset emerged from behind bushes in the backyard, ambushing him with a heavy metal object. Thomas struck Stephen in the head, then wrapped a rope around his neck and strangled him. Kathleen, inside the house, later claimed she was changing Elizabeth's diaper at the time and had no knowledge of what was happening outside. But prosecutors would argue she was fully aware and complicit in the plan. After ending Stephen's life, Thomas and Kathleen faced the problem of disposing of his body. They wrapped him in a tarp, placed him in the trunk of Stephen's mother's car, a 2001 Nissan Altima, and waited. Thomas had already arranged for someone to help with the final step. He contacted a man named Andre Morris and paid him $3,000 to set the car on fire. Morris took the money but did not follow through, so Thomas ended up torching the car himself. He drove the vehicle to Long Branch, doused it in accelerant, and ignited it. When firefighters extinguished the blaze on August 18th, they discovered Stephen's charred remains in the trunk. Stephen was reported missing by his employer when he failed to show up for work. His mother also reported him missing, growing increasingly frantic as days passed without contact. When his body was identified, investigators immediately began questioning those closest to him. Kathleen told police she had last seen Stephen during a routine custody exchange and claimed to know nothing about his whereabouts afterward. She even asked a neighbor to close her window when the neighbor mentioned hearing screams from the property, explaining that her dog was having a seizure. It was a calculated lie designed to deflect suspicion. But the investigation soon uncovered inconsistencies in Kathleen's story. Cell phone records, surveillance footage, and witness statements began to paint a very different picture. Detectives discovered that Kathleen had been visiting her father in jail. Thomas had been incarcerated on unrelated charges. And during those visits, they discussed not only Stephen's fate, but also a new target, Stephen's mother, Evelyn Moore. Kathleen and Leslie Dorset feared that Evelyn would testify against them and potentially gain custody of Elizabeth. So they hatched another plan. Kathleen wrote a letter to her mother, instructing her on how to carry out a hit on Evelyn Moore. She wanted the death to appear natural, suggesting it could be made to look like a diabetic episode. Leslie agreed and paid $1,000 to someone she believed was a hitman. In reality, the person was a police informant, and the entire conversation was recorded. The evidence was overwhelming. In May 2013, all 3 members of the Dorset family entered guilty pleas. Thomas Dorset pleaded guilty to murder and arson for hire. Leslie Dorset pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit murder. Kathleen Dorset pleaded guilty to murder, conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, desecrating human remains, and tampering with evidence. At their sentencing hearing in August 2013, the courtroom was filled with emotional testimony from Stephen's family and friends. Judge Anthony Melisy Jr. did not mince words. He described Kathleen as narcissistic and noted that her tears seemed performative, turning on and off at will. He called the case an American family tragedy and placed the majority of the blame squarely on Kathleen's shoulders. Thomas Dorset was sentenced to 45 years in prison, with a minimum of 30 years before parole eligibility. Leslie Dorset received a 7-year sentence and was released in 2016 after completing her term. Kathleen Dorset was sentenced to 58 years in prison, 30 years for murder, 20 years for attempted murder, and 8 years for conspiracy. She must serve at least 47 years before she can be considered for parole, meaning she will not be eligible until 2060, when she will be 86 years old. Kathleen is currently incarcerated at the Edna Mahan Correctional Facility for Women in Clinton, New Jersey. Since her conviction, the New Jersey Department of Education has revoked her teaching credentials. Her daughter, Elizabeth, is being raised by relatives and has no contact with her mother or surviving grandmother. The case has been featured on Dateline NBC and in multiple true crime documentaries, serving as a cautionary tale about how toxic family dynamics and parental obsession can lead to unthinkable violence. Stephen Moore's mother, Evelyn, has said that while justice was served, no verdict can bring her son back or undo the trauma inflicted on Elizabeth, who will grow up knowing her mother orchestrated her father's demise. The Dorset case is a grim reminder that sometimes the most dangerous conspiracies are born not in dark alleys or criminal enterprises, but within the supposed safety of family homes. And yet, as horrific as family betrayal can be, the next case would show that romantic relationships can be equally deadly. Case 7. Joseph Villani. Some crimes happen in the heat of passion, others through careful calculation. Joseph Villani's fell somewhere in between, a plan born from envy that he convinced himself would solve all his problems. Joseph Villani was 20 years old, living with his parents in Ocean Township, New Jersey. He was a small-time marijuana dealer, selling to friends and acquaintances, but never making enough money to feel secure. He watched others around him succeed, envying their cars, their clothes, their apparent freedom from financial worry. And no one embodied that success more than Trupal Patel, a 29-year-old dealer from Brick Township who drove a black Jaguar and seemed to have everything Joseph wanted. Joseph had known about Trupal for months. In the tight-knit marijuana dealing community along the Jersey Shore, everyone knew who was moving product and making money. Joseph would joke with friends about wanting to meet Trupal, sometimes adding half seriously, that he wanted to rob him. Those comments seemed like typical bravado at first, the kind of thing young men say when they feel powerless. But as Joseph's financial situation worsened and his frustrations grew, those jokes started to sound less like fantasy and more like intention. By early February 2017, Joseph had made his decision. He convinced himself that robbing Trupel would be simple, just a transaction that went wrong, a quick score that would set him up financially. He discussed the plan with his girlfriend, Raquel Garajao, who encouraged him, even as she later claimed she thought he was simply venting. On February 6th, Joseph reached out to Trupel, arranging to meet at his home under the pretense of making a purchase. Trupel, seeing it as routine business, agreed. When Trupel arrived at Joseph's Ocean Township residence around 4 p.m, he walked into the garage expecting a straightforward deal. Instead, Joseph was waiting with a .22 caliber Marlin long rifle. Without warning or conversation, Joseph opened fire, shooting Trupel 3 times. Trupel collapsed, mortally wounded, as Joseph immediately began rifling through his pockets and searching the Jaguar for cash and marijuana. The robbery netted far less than Joseph had anticipated, a few $100s and a modest amount of product. For hours, Trupel's body remained in Joseph's garage while Joseph tried to figure out his next move. Rather than panicking, Joseph and Raquel decided to go shopping. They drove to a nearby mall, walked into a Pandora jewelry store, and used Trupel's money to buy a promise ring that Raquel had been wanting. The clerk who sold them the ring later testified at trial, describing the couple as calm and happy, showing no signs of distress. Meanwhile, a man lay deceased just miles away in Joseph's garage. As evening approached, Joseph realized he needed help disposing of the evidence. He contacted his friend Tyler Uhas, spinning a story about needing assistance moving a relative's car to an auto body shop in Asbury Park. Tyler agreed, thinking he was doing a favor. When he arrived and saw the black Jaguar, something felt off. Joseph's explanation kept changing. First, it was a relative's vehicle, then a friend's, and finally Joseph just insisted it needed to be moved immediately. Tyler drove the car to Asbury Park, but instead of taking it to a shop, Joseph told him to abandon it on a side street. Tyler complied, though his suspicions were growing. Joseph then enlisted another acquaintance to help move Trupel's body. Together, they transported the remains to Shark River Park in Wall Township, leaving them along Gully Road, partially hidden down a slope. Joseph believed the location was remote enough that the body might not be discovered for weeks. On February 9th, when Trupel failed to return home, his family reported him missing. The abandoned Jaguar was found that same day in Asbury Park, triggering an immediate investigation. On February 22nd, a Monmouth County park ranger collecting litter discovered Trupel's body. The medical examiner confirmed he had been shot multiple times. Detectives quickly traced the Jaguar back to Tyler Uhas, who told investigators everything he knew about Joseph Villani. Tyler's cooperation proved crucial. He described Joseph's strange behavior, the inconsistent stories, and his own growing suspicion that something terrible had happened. Police executed search warrants on Joseph's home and garage. Forensic teams discovered blood evidence that matched Trupel Patel's DNA. Cell phone records placed Joseph in the area where Trupel's body was found. The evidence was overwhelming. On February 25th, 2017, Joseph Villani was arrested and charged with murder, robbery, and conspiracy. Faced with the mountain of evidence against him, Joseph eventually accepted a plea agreement. On January 4th, 2019, he stood before Judge Joseph Oxley and pleaded guilty to first-degree aggravated manslaughter, armed robbery, conspiracy to commit armed robbery, desecration of human remains, and witness tampering. In his allocution, Joseph admitted that he had planned to rob Trupel, that he had armed himself with a rifle and that he had shot Trupel 3 times during the robbery. He acknowledged disposing of the body and attempting to cover up his crime. On April 5, 2019, Judge Oxley sentenced Joseph Villani to 40 years in New Jersey State Prison. Under the terms of the No Early Release Act, Joseph must serve at least 25.5 years before becoming eligible for parole. That means he will not be considered for release until he is in his mid-40s. Joseph is currently incarcerated at a New Jersey correctional facility, where he will spend decades reflecting on the 15 minutes of violence that destroyed multiple lives. For Trupel Patel's family, the conviction brought some measure of closure, but it could never restore what was taken. Trupel was a son, a brother, and a friend. His death left his family devastated and his community shaken. The case serves as a stark reminder that envy and desperation can drive people to commit acts they never imagined themselves capable of, and that the consequences of those acts extend far beyond the immediate victim. Joseph Villani's story is one of wasted potential and tragic choices. He threw away his freedom, his future, and another man's life for a few $100s and a misguided belief that robbery could solve his problems. His case stands as a cautionary tale about the devastating cost of greed and the irreversible nature of violence. But Joseph's actions didn't just destroy his own life. They also ensnared his girlfriend, whose role in the crime would soon become its own shocking revelation. Case 8, Raquel Garajao. Brookdale Community College had many honors students, but few would end up with a criminal record quite like Raquel Garajao's. At 20 years old, Raquel seemed to have a bright future ahead of her. She was an honors student at Brookdale, focused and ambitious, the kind of young woman professors believed would go far. She lived in Tinton Falls, New Jersey, with her family and maintained a relationship with Joseph Villani, a young man from nearby Ocean Township. To outsiders, they appeared to be a typical young couple, navigating college, work, and the challenges of early adulthood together. But behind the facade of normalcy, Raquel and Joseph were planning something terrible. In the weeks leading up to February 6, 2017, the couple discussed robbing Trupel Patel, a local marijuana dealer Joseph had grown envious of. While Joseph would later admit to being the shooter, investigators discovered that Raquel was far more involved than she initially claimed. Text messages recovered from her phone painted a damning picture of coordination, encouragement, and active participation in both the crime and its cover-up. When Joseph shot Trupel 3 times in his garage on that February afternoon, Raquel was not present. But prosecutors argued that her absence from the actual scene was irrelevant. She had helped plan the robbery, knew Joseph would be armed, and actively assisted in destroying evidence afterward. The text messages she sent Joseph in the hours and days following the crime would become the centerpiece of the prosecution's case against her. After Trupel was deceased, Raquel sent Joseph a series of instructions. "You need to clean the bullets," she texted. "Take your time bleaching everything, the whole entire door and inside." Another message read, "Take that bag of stuff out because I touched his phone. We will throw that stuff in the ocean." She urged Joseph to move Trupel's car immediately. Texting, "Babe, you need to move that car. It's too important. Like ASAP. People will start noticing he's not answering." And perhaps most chillingly, while Joseph was disposing of Trupel's body in Shark River Park, Raquel sent him a message saying, "FaceTime me please when you are done. I love you." These were not the words of someone unaware of what had happened. They were the calculated instructions of someone actively helping to conceal evidence and evade detection. Prosecutors argued that Raquel's texts demonstrated not only knowledge of the crime, but also participation in its planning and execution. She knew Joseph was going to rob Trupel. She knew he was armed. And when things went fatally wrong, she immediately shifted into cover-up mode, directing Joseph on how to eliminate any traces of their involvement. Raquel was arrested on May 15, 2017, months after Joseph's arrest. She was charged with first-degree felony murder, conspiracy to commit armed robbery, theft, weapons offenses, tampering with evidence, hindering apprehension, and tampering with a witness. Prosecutors offered her a plea deal, plead guilty to armed robbery, and accept a 10-year sentence. Raquel refused. She maintained that she had no knowledge of Joseph's plans and that her text messages were simply her trying to protect her boyfriend after the fact. She insisted she was innocent and demanded a trial. The trial began on July 17, 2018, and lasted nearly 2 months. Prosecutors presented 35 witnesses, including law enforcement officials, forensic experts, and Joseph Villani himself. Joseph, who had already pleaded guilty and been sentenced, testified against Raquel, describing how she had helped him plan the robbery and had been fully aware that he would be armed with a rifle. He admitted that they had gone shopping together hours after the crime, using Truppel's money to buy Raquel the promise ring she had been requesting. The defense argued that Raquel was a young woman manipulated by an older, more experienced boyfriend, that she had been coerced or misled into thinking Joseph was simply venting his frustrations rather than seriously planning a robbery. But the text messages spoke for themselves. They were detailed, specific, and demonstrated an active role in concealing evidence. The jury was particularly struck by the message Raquel sent while Joseph was disposing of Truppel's body, asking him to FaceTime her when he was finished and telling him she loved him. It suggested not just awareness, but emotional support for what was happening. On September 12, 2018, after just a few hours of deliberation, the jury found Raquel Garajao guilty on all counts. The verdict stunned her family and supporters, many of whom had believed she was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. But the evidence had been overwhelming, and the jury concluded that Raquel was not a victim of Joseph's manipulation. She was an active participant in a robbery that ended in another person's demise. At her sentencing hearing on January 18, 2019, Judge Joseph Oxley did not mince words. He noted that Raquel had shown no remorse for her role in Truppel Patel's demise. Even after her conviction, she continued to maintain her innocence, refusing to acknowledge the harm she had caused. Judge Oxley sentenced her to 33 years in New Jersey State Prison, with a minimum of 30 years before parole eligibility. Raquel would not be considered for release until she was in her 50s. Today, Raquel Garajao is incarcerated at the Edna Mahan Correctional Facility for women in Clinton, New Jersey. Her case has been featured on true crime television programs, often cited as an example of how seemingly intelligent, ambitious young people can become entangled in violent crime. The text messages she sent remain chilling evidence of how technology can preserve a detailed record of criminal activity, making it nearly impossible to deny involvement. For Truppel Patel's family, Raquel's conviction brought a measure of justice, though it could never undo the loss they suffered. They have said that both Joseph and Raquel destroyed their son's life for greed and selfishness, and that no amount of prison time can truly balance that equation. The case serves as a sobering reminder that choices have consequences, and that helping to cover up a crime can be just as devastating as committing it. But Raquel wasn't the only accomplice in New Jersey who would pay a heavy price for helping someone else commit murder. Case 9. Preston Taylor. Some people become accomplices out of loyalty, others out of fear, and some simply because they lack the courage to say no. Preston Taylor's involvement in Sarah Stern's demise would prove that even good intentions can lead to catastrophic choices. Preston Taylor had known Sarah Stern since they were children. They grew up together in Neptune, New Jersey, attending the same schools and sharing the same circle of friends. In high school, their relationship took on a romantic dimension when Sarah attended prom with Preston as her date. Though their romantic connection eventually faded, they remained close friends. Preston also developed a strong friendship with Liam McAtasney, who would later become his roommate. The three of them, Sarah, Preston, and Liam, seemed like typical young people navigating life in a small coastal town. But in late 2016, that friendship would be tested in the most horrific way imaginable. Liam McAtasney had become fixated on the idea that Sarah was hiding a large sum of money in her home, an inheritance from her late mother. Liam began talking about robbing Sarah, initially framing it as a joke, but gradually becoming more serious. Preston listened to these conversations, sometimes dismissing them as idle talk, other times growing uncomfortable with how detailed Liam's plans were becoming. On Thanksgiving Day, 2016, Preston later testified, Liam laid out his full plan. He intended to strangle Sarah, steal her money, and dispose of her body by throwing it off the Route 35 bridge in Belmar, making it look like an accident. Preston was horrified, but he also felt trapped. Liam was his roommate, his closest friend, and someone Preston believed might actually carry out the plan, whether he helped or not. Preston made the fateful decision not to go to the police, a choice that would haunt him for the rest of his life. On December 2nd, 2016, Liam carried out his plan. He went to Sarah's home, strangled her in a prolonged and brutal attack that took nearly 30 minutes, and then called Preston for help. Preston arrived to find Sarah deceased, and Liam rifling through her safe, which contained only $10,000, far less than Liam had anticipated. Preston helped Liam wrap Sarah's body and place it in her mother's van. Together, they drove to the Route 35 bridge in Belmar, a location they had scouted beforehand. In the early hours of December 3rd, they threw Sarah's body off the bridge into the Shark River below. They left Sarah's car parked near the bridge to make it appear she had ended her own life. Preston and Liam then returned to their normal routines, attending classes, going to work, and even participating in search efforts when Sarah was reported missing. Preston later described feeling paralyzed by guilt and fear, knowing what had happened, but terrified of the consequences of coming forward. The turning point came in January 2017, when Liam bragged about the crime to their mutual friend, Anthony Curry, an amateur filmmaker. Unbeknownst to Liam, Anthony had already contacted police, and he secretly recorded Liam's confession. When investigators arrested Liam, they quickly turned their attention to Preston. Faced with overwhelming evidence and the knowledge that his involvement was undeniable, Preston made a decision that would define the rest of his life. He cooperated with authorities. In 2017, Preston Taylor entered into a plea agreement with the Monmouth County Prosecutor's Office. He pleaded guilty to first-degree robbery, second-degree conspiracy to commit robbery, and second-degree desecrating human remains. In exchange for his cooperation and truthful testimony against Liam McAtasney, prosecutors recommended a sentence of 10 to 20 years in prison. Preston accepted the deal, knowing it meant he would spend a significant portion of his life behind bars, but hoping that his cooperation would help bring justice for Sarah and her family. At Liam McAtasney's trial in early 2019, Preston took the stand and testified about everything that had happened. He described how Liam had planned the crime for months, how he had called Preston for help after strangling Sarah, and how they had disposed of her body together. Preston's testimony was emotional and detailed, providing prosecutors with a first-hand account of the events that led to Sarah's demise. The jury found Liam guilty on all counts, and Liam was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Preston Taylor's own sentencing came later that year. On a summer day in 2019, Preston stood before Judge Richard English and received his sentence, 18 years in New Jersey State Prison. Under the No Early Release Act, Preston must serve 85% of his sentence before becoming eligible for parole, meaning he will serve approximately 15 years behind bars. Judge English noted that Preston's cooperation had been crucial to securing Liam's conviction, but also emphasized that Preston's failure to stop the crime, or report it earlier, had contributed to Sarah's demise. Preston is currently serving his sentence at a New Jersey correctional facility. He has expressed remorse for his role in Sarah's demise, acknowledging that his failure to act cost Sarah her life and devastated her family. His case has sparked discussions about the legal and moral responsibilities of bystanders, and whether someone who helps dispose of a body after the fact should be held to the same standard as the person who committed the act itself. For Sarah Stern's father, Michael, Preston's conviction brought some measure of accountability, but it could never restore his daughter. Michael has said that while Preston was not the one who strangled Sarah, his decision to help Liam made him complicit in her demise. Sarah's body has never been recovered, and the Stern family continues to live with the pain of not being able to lay her to rest properly. Preston Taylor's story is a tragic reminder that silence in the face of evil can be just as destructive as the evil itself. His decision not to report Liam's plans and then to help dispose of Sarah's body transformed him from a bystander into an accomplice. His cooperation with authorities likely prevented Liam from escaping justice, but it came too late to save Sarah. Preston will spend the next decade and a half reflecting on the choices he made and the life that was lost because he failed to speak up when it mattered most. Yet even as Preston's story illustrates the consequences of loyalty gone wrong, the final case would show that jealousy and obsession could drive someone to attempt another person's demise, not once, but twice. Case 10, Jennifer Sweeney. Jealousy is a powerful emotion capable of driving people to irrational and destructive behavior. But for Jennifer Sweeney, jealousy became something far worse. It became a justification for ending another person's life. Jennifer Sweeney, a 38-year-old woman from Tinton Falls, New Jersey, had been in a relationship with Tarita Julius, a 41-year-old mother from Linden. The two women had met through a motorcycle club and quickly became close. But as their relationship progressed, cracks began to appear. Jennifer was intensely possessive, constantly worried that Tarita was being unfaithful. Friends described Jennifer as a jealous lover, someone who needed to control every aspect of her partner's life. When Tarita began pulling away, seeking more independence and space, Jennifer's obsession deepened. Unable to accept the possibility of losing Tarita, Jennifer hatched a plan. She reached out to Andre Harris, a high school friend, and asked him to do the unthinkable. She wanted him to end Tarita's life. Andre later testified that Jennifer told him, "If I can't have her, no one can." Jennifer provided Andre with a firearm and gave him detailed instructions. She threatened that if he refused, she would harm his children. Andre, terrified and feeling trapped, agreed to carry out the plan. On November 24, 2015, just 2 days before Thanksgiving, Tarita was driving her vehicle in Linden with her 15-year-old daughter in the front passenger seat. Andre Harris approached the car and opened fire, shooting Tarita 8 times. The vehicle crashed into a utility pole shortly after the attack. When police arrived, they found Tarita critically wounded but alive. Her daughter had also been shot and injured. Both were rushed to the hospital, where they eventually recovered from their physical injuries. It seemed, against all odds, that Tarita had survived. But Jennifer was not finished. While Tarita recovered in the hospital, Jennifer used the opportunity to reinsert herself into Tarita's life. She visited Tarita, expressed concern, and offered support. Tarita, unaware that Jennifer had orchestrated the attack, allowed her back in. It was a fatal mistake. On March 8, 2016, Tarita spent the evening with Jennifer in Tinton Falls. Tarita's mother later reported that her daughter never came home. Family and friends launched a desperate search, organizing community efforts to find her. Jennifer even joined the search parties, acting concerned and cooperative while knowing exactly what had happened. The investigation into Tarita's disappearance eventually led detectives to Andre Harris. On August 16, 2016, police executed a search warrant at Andre's home in Long Branch. In the backyard, they discovered Tarita's remains, buried in a shallow grave. Her body was wrapped in 2 garbage bags, and an electrical cord was wrapped tightly around her neck. Jennifer had strangled Tarita to death and then forced Andre at gunpoint to help her bury the body. The discovery sent shockwaves through the community and confirmed the worst fears of Tarita's family. Jennifer Sweeney and Andre Harris were both arrested and charged with first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, desecrating human remains, and weapons offenses. Andre quickly reached a plea agreement, accepting a 16-year sentence in exchange for his testimony against Jennifer. During Jennifer's trial, Andre described the months of manipulation, threats, and violence that Jennifer had orchestrated. He recounted how she had threatened his children, how she had provided the weapon, and how she had shown no remorse even after Tarita survived the shooting. He testified that Jennifer became enraged when the first attempt failed, telling him she would find another way. The prosecution presented text messages, phone records, and forensic evidence that painted a damning picture of Jennifer's actions. They argued that Jennifer's jealousy had consumed her to the point where she could not accept Tarita's autonomy. Instead of letting go, she decided that if she could not have Tarita, then no one would. The trial lasted several weeks, and in September 2021, a jury found Jennifer Sweeney guilty on all counts. At her sentencing hearing on May 6, 2022, the courtroom was filled with Tarita's family and friends, many of whom wore purple, Tarita's favorite color. Tarita's mother, Queen Julius, sobbed as she read a victim impact statement, saying, "I will forever be heartbroken. She was my child, my only daughter." Superior Court Judge David Bauman did not hold back in his remarks. He called Jennifer's actions cold-hearted depravity and described the scheme as one of the most heinous cases of manipulation he had ever encountered. He sentenced Jennifer to 95 years in prison, 75 years for murder, and 20 years for the attempted shooting. Both sentences would run consecutively. Under New Jersey's No Early Release Act, Jennifer must serve 85% of both terms before becoming eligible for parole. That means she will not be eligible until she is well over 100 years old, effectively a life sentence. Jennifer Sweeney is currently incarcerated at the Edna Mahan Correctional Facility for Women in Clinton, New Jersey, where she will likely spend the rest of her life. Tarita Julius's story is a heartbreaking reminder of how jealousy, possessiveness, and control can escalate into violence. Tarita was a mother, a daughter, and a friend. She survived one attempt on her life, only to be betrayed by the very person she believed cared for her. Her 15-year-old daughter, who witnessed the shooting and survived, now lives with the trauma of that night and the knowledge that her mother's partner orchestrated the attack. The case has been featured in multiple true crime programs, highlighting the dangers of obsessive relationships and the devastating consequences of unchecked jealousy. Jennifer Sweeney's fall from a seemingly normal life to a convicted killer is a stark illustration of how love, when twisted by possessiveness and control, can become something monstrous. Her actions destroyed not only Tarita's life, but also the lives of Tarita's family, her daughter, and even Andre Harris, who was coerced into becoming an accomplice. the case stands as a grim reminder that sometimes the greatest danger comes not from strangers, but from those who claim to love us. And that concludes our journey through New Jersey evil. 10 cases that prove darkness can hide anywhere, even in the most ordinary places. From Paul Canero's family tragedy still awaiting trial, to Jennifer Sweeney's 95-year sentence for a crime of obsession, these stories remind us that the line between everyday life and unthinkable violence is thinner than we'd like to believe. Each case carries lessons about greed, jealousy, betrayal, and the devastating consequences of choices made in moments of desperation. If you found these stories compelling, we have dozens more waiting for you. Click that notification bell so you won't miss our next deep dive into true crime. Make sure to watch our other videos, because the truth is often stranger and more terrifying than fiction. Stay safe out there.